Welcome to the second conversation in our series on Children of Legends. Welcome back, Rachel.
Thank you, Rabbi Adam. It's nice to be here.
Last time we talked about Abraham and the child of the legend Yitzhak. Abraham was a legend like no other, but he was kind of a legend in a way in which he was put on a pedestal. Put on a pedestal by God and put on a pedestal by all Jews who follow in the tradition of Abraham. And Yitzhak had to live in the shadow of that legend. Today, we're going to move from the stories of Abraham, the stories of the Chumash, to the stories of the prophets. And let's look at the children of Saul, the first king. Now, Rachel, Saul, Shaul, is also a legend. Being the first king of Israel, being tall, being handsome, that's legendary. And you can imagine that his children had challenges, had struggled being his children. But Shaul is very much of a different type of character than Abraham. He's not on a pedestal in the same way. His legendariness, if there's such a term, comes from his position of king and from the power that he had. What do you make of Shaul, and what do you make of his children as the children of this legend?
I think this is a very good insight, that as we move from Abraham to Shaul, and of course we're skipping an entire gamut of stories here, but we're moving from the realm of missions and responsibility to the realm of power. What does it mean to grow up as a child of someone of power? What kind of expectations does it place on you? How does it complicate, challenge, shape the way you live your life? And the way it affected Shaul's children is both fascinating and very, very tragic, because Shaul was elected in his youth as this hope for a new future, as this hope for a future where there's going to be centralized rule, one king leading people who before that were tribes who weren't able to withstand external attacks and even fought civil wars amongst themselves. He will unite us, he will lead us, he will defend us, he will protect us. And then, for various reasons we can't really go into right now, God rejects him. And God tells him, your children will not inherit you. I will choose a different king to replace you. And Shaul can't accept that. At this point, we know of at least 3 children in the Shaul household. We know of his son, and in his mind also his heir, Yonatan. And Yonatan is portrayed as this ideal young man. He takes initiative. He is beloved by the people. He is a great warrior. He is brave. He is honest. There's nothing wrong, obviously wrong, with Yonatan. Nothing that justifies, in Shaul's mind, in our mind as readers, taking away his royal future. And yet, due to his father's failure, he loses this hope. The other children we know of at this point are daughters. We know of Merav, that exists there in the background, but we don't know much about her. And we know of Michal, Shaul's daughter. And Michal has this very unique distinction. She is the first person, the first woman, and the only woman in the Hebrew Bible of whom we hear that she loved a man. Isn't it amazing? We hear of all those men who loved their wives or other women in various cases, but only of one woman who loved a man. Sadly, the man that Michal loves is exactly the man that God elected to replace her father, namely young David. And not only does she love him, but Yonatan, her brother, also loves him. And the rest of the story of these first royal children in Israelite history, the first children of a united court that rules over the entire people of Israel, is defined, is shaped by the tension between their father's expectation and his refusal to accept the end of his dynasty, and these children's, Yonatan and Michal's, love and loyalty to David. And I mean, all of us experience on some level, at some time, the tension between family loyalties and personal inclination. But in most cases, for most of us, the stakes are not quite as high as the future of a kingdom. And this is what really shapes the tragedy that is to come for Shaul's children.
And you discussed the idea of loyalty, being a child of a legend, and the expectation, and that's really what it is, the expectation that the child of the legend is going to be loyal to the legend. Now, like you said, all parents expect their children to be loyal. But when you're the king, that expectation isn't only personal, it kind of fits into, into the rubric of the way we understand kingship. It's interesting that even in the monarchy in the 21st century, they're still, discussing loyalty to the queen and what happens when the children or the grandchildren aren't loyal enough to the queen. So this is not an issue that, that was created by King Saul. This is an issue within the kingship. But what do you make of the fact that both Michal and Yonatan, the issue of loyalty plays itself out in the enemy of their father? Is that just a literary technique of the book, of the books of the Tanakh, or is there something kind of instructive about the fact that the very person that their father hates, that's the one who they feel that loyalty to?
So of course, if I was speaking from a psychoanalytic perspective, I would say, yes, this is a psychological truth that's at the core of human existence. We all love that which replaces our parents and, in a sense, want to replace them ourselves, right? But even without resorting to such dramatically extra biblical sources, I think that what we're seeing here is the biblical storyteller emphasizing on the human scale the drama that's taking place on the divine scale or in the divine realm, in the sense that Shaul was elected and then rejected by Hashem, by God. There's a certain element in kingship in the Bible that perhaps we don't really attribute to 21st century royals in England, which is godly intervention, which is the idea that the king is supposed to be not just a leader to the people, but also a servant of God. And God is the one who rejects Shaul in favor of David. Michal and Yonatan, and all the many, many other people who love David, he's the most beloved, most explicitly beloved character in the entire Tanakh, enact on a human level exactly what's going on behind the screen. They are giving expression to the election that David carries within him as he goes through his life. Now, I want to pause here for a second and say that this all sounds very, very metaphysical and, blah, 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 big, high words. But the truth is that the drama of Shaul's election and rejection is emotional and fraught, even on the divine level. It's clear that God has fondness for Shaul from the way Shmuel, the prophet who anointed him, talks about him. And yet God says, you fall short, you're not enough. And then we see the same ambivalence playing out in other relationships. So for example, what happens with Yonatan is that Yonatan constantly tries to be a bridge between his father and David, to make David believe that his father doesn't mean it. He doesn't mean to persecute David. He doesn't mean to try and kill him. He doesn't mean to send him away from the court. And at the same time trying to convince his father, no, David is our friend. David is your most loyal general. Don't hurt him. Don't do bad things to him. He's constantly trying to find a way to keep them at peace with each other, which, due to the nature of kingship, due to the nature of the fact that one of them will be king and one of them won't, and they can't both be kings at the same time, is impossible to achieve. Yonatan is trying to achieve the impossible. At the same time, Michal, who ends up marrying David and then helping him escape when her father tries to execute him, is at this point in the story choosing David over her father. But years and years later, after her father is dead, after his court is gone, after her brother Yonatan died in battle long ago, when she is once again reunited with David and his queen, she disdains him. She can no longer respect him. And the last scene in which we see David and Michal together, she is described as the daughter of Shaul. She's no longer the wife of David. She is the daughter of Shaul. And she looks at him dancing in front of the Ark of the Covenant and tells him, you humiliated yourself today. And he, in a very harsh rejoinder, says, I humiliated myself. Perhaps I made myself humble before God, who chose me over your father and his entire house. And we're told then, the last thing we're told about her is that Michal, daughter of Shaul, had no children until her dying day. She had no future. In her attempt to first be loyal to her husband and then belatedly show an odd loyalty or affinity with her father, she doomed herself to be neither here nor there and have no future.
And that's fascinating. And what you're really saying, as we move from Yitzchak and his relationship to Abraham to the children of King Saul, the first king, and that is that sometimes children of legends, they're conflicted about their loyalty. The very loyalty that you're supposed to have because you're a child of a legend creates tremendous self-internal conflict. But what you're saying, and I think that's such a wonderful way to end, is the fact that for both Yonatan and Michal, the story ends with that ambivalence. The story doesn't end, they sided with David, David became the king, and everybody lived happily ever after. No, for Yonatan and Michal, they did not live happily ever after. They died with that ambivalence that goes along with being the children of legends. And I think that maybe that's a sad aspect of being children of legends. Maybe sometimes the responsibility that you so wonderfully talked about when it came to Yitzchak, maybe that responsibility is so complicated that when you put loyalty, family loyalty, and you pit it against your own personal feelings, maybe it's unresolvable. And that's what you see in the story of Yonatan and Michal. And I think that's a wonderful bridge to the next and the final piece in our conversation. And that's going to be the children of this beloved King David. You built up King David, the most beloved of all. But as everyone is going to find out in the next conversation, King David had his own troubles. And I look forward to talking to you about the children of King David.
Thank you, Rabbi Adam. Pleasure as always.